Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Thanks for coming to our second annual Hemp, a year in review. I think you'll find a lot of interesting things in today's meeting. We'll have some time at the end for questions as well. I'd like to do a few introductions before we get started. Of course, Dwayne Sinning, the Assistant Director for the Division of Plant Industry, and our Hemp Program Manager will carry out the bulk of the program today. We have Dave Joris from the Attorney General's Office. He provides legal counsel to us in case we have some legal questions. A few other people I'd like to introduce. Terry Moran, recently hired by us as our hemp seed certification specialist, so we can get that program going and get some certified seed out there for growers to use. We have Chad Fitzer from our advisory committee, as well as Grant Morvis. We have an 11-member advisory committee now. Extremely important to the program that we get that input from them as we go through and try to make policy as well as legal decisions in all of this.
Let's go over.
Yeah, we need to introduce Sharon.
Thank you.
She's kind of the face of the whole program. And most of you probably have a lot more contact with her than with anybody else. So for those of you who don't know, this is Sharon Farr. Most of you talk to her on the phone.
Ooh, Sharon!
She's the one who makes it go. She's the one most of you either email with or visit with on the phone, and she does us a tremendous job. One thing, just to let you know, yesterday afternoon we had a meeting scheduled on breeder rights and plant patents, somewhat for hemp, but also for a broader audience, the whole ag group. We had about 75 to 80 people signed up to attend, and with the snowstorm, we ended up canceling it. The speakers weren't going to be able to get here. Most of the attendees probably weren't going to be here. And so we're going to get that rescheduled probably the week of January 11th here in this room. So those of you who are planning on that, it's very important to us. I think it's a valuable meeting for this industry as well as others. So we will get that rescheduled here within the next few weeks after Christmas. We are streaming this live out into the Netherlands, and people on the other side of the world, I guess, can watch our Hemp in Review. It's going out on YouTube, so it'll be there for posterity. If you know people who want to look at it, it'll be taped there, and you can look at it there. There'll probably be a link somewhere on the department's website for you to find it as well. So we're advancing in our technology as we have a large amount of people who want to be involved in this. We had about 100 people signed up, so there's people in this room, and if we have overflow, there's another room where people will be as well. If you need restrooms and that, there's some signs and some staff out there. They're down kind of where you came in. Otherwise, we probably won't take a break until this is over. There is some water and coffee over here on the side if you need something to drink. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Dwayne.
Again, I'd like to reiterate, thank everybody for coming today. I think this really shows how far the industry has come, the interest there is out there, and especially in weather like this, while it looks like we maybe have a few vacant seats, it's pretty impressive considering the weather, how far some of you have come to be part of this today. So with that, I'm going to get started. Kind of a little bit about what we're going to do today. We'll go through what 2014 touched. We'll touch on that. We'll talk just a little bit about what is industrial hemp for those that haven't been involved in the industrial hemp and are here to try to learn a little bit about it. And then we will move into 2015, and we'll move into some of the rules. And then we're going to spend a little time talking about the seed certification program, because we here at the Department of Ag look at that as one of those critical pieces to make this a real agricultural commodity and a real agricultural product. So we want to spend a little time on that. It's not really a rule. It's really how are we going to get this program to the next step. So with that in mind, behind my back, oh, wait a minute. In the back of the room, Commissioner Brown has joined us for a minute. So, Commissioner, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Well, you know me, I never miss a chance to say something. Dwayne and Mitch. Hello, David. How are you? I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending today. We're all working very hard on this to structure a program that works for everybody, that's part of a viable and growing industry, and we're spending a lot of resources and time and effort here in our department making sure that we get this organized so that we create a business environment and business model that you can use, that's dependable, that's a level playing field for everybody. I'm a businessman myself, I'm a farmer and a rancher, and typically I recognize among my competitors, and I refer to my fellow farmers and ranchers, all I'm asking is for is a level playing field, and I'm sure that that applies to each and every one of you. So thanks for coming here today for our informational meeting, and I'm going to quit at that. I'll turn it back over to Dwayne and Mitch, and once again, thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. So with that, we'll kind of get started. Maybe.
We need a bigger hand.
Yeah. We have a program, we just can't advance it. You may be advancing this manually.
Technical difficulties are
I apologize out
happening,
there, and,
everybody.
I don't want to call it
But
TV.
they'll get it working in a minute.
Those
Hang in
that
there.
Are out there. We're having a few IT issues, just trying to get the presentation to advance. So patience out there. Everybody in the room can see how we're struggling. But for those out there, we have a bunch of people running around behind the camera right now trying to get this to work. So. Yeah. There we go. All right, so we're going to do this manually. So you're going to hear me say, next slide, please, a lot during the day. So first, for those, again, that want to know what industrial hemp is, what does it mean? The term industrial hemp means a plant of the genus cannabis, which is a little different than the federal definition, because there they go into, it is cannabis sativa. And any part of the plant, whether growing or not, with a delta-9 tetrahydrocarbonyl concentration of no more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. That's what the Colorado Constitution says. So, constitutionally, I'll make sure that I hit on this, and you're going to hear this several times during the day. Constitutionally, if it's over 0.3% delta-9 THC, it is marijuana. It is not industrial hemp. Where does that 0.3% THC come from? Well, the Office of Drug and Crime and most international treaties use what is generally recognized as the upper limit of 0.3% THC. Canada and Australia use 0.3% THC. European Union actually uses 0.2. They're lower than most of the world. The federal government and the Farm Bill used 0.3%. And again, most importantly to us, the voters of Colorado decided that 0.3 was what is the limit for industrial hemp. So why is the THC threshold important for Colorado's industry? Well, this is kind of Dwayne's pitch for why this is really important to you. It's not about getting high. I often hear people come in and talk about, well, geez, you can't get high until there's this debate whether it's 1%, 1.5%, 2%, 3%. I don't really care what it is. The reason it's important is purely in economics for this industry. If you go over 0.3%, you're no longer compliant with the federal law. You're no longer, when the DEA and the DOJ want to talk about it, you're outside of any bounds that the federal government has set for it. Your state universities can't participate in the program, so they can't be doing any research, they can't be doing any extension, they can't help us with seed testing or seed certification. So it's important to recognize those, but it's also important to recognize, if you said you could get over all of that, you just shrank your market down to the state of Colorado. Because once you go over 0.3%, even when it becomes federally legal, it'll become federally legal at 0.3%. It'll become trade agreements at 0.3%. You'll have no market other than right here in the state. So it is really important for you to understand, this is not about getting high. This is not a discussion about whether you get high or don't get high. The discussion that we ought to be having is, how do you make this a real industry beyond the state's borders and within the state's borders while it is legal within the state. Next slide. So industrial hemp versus marijuana, where are they apart? Where are they, and how do you separate them? And again, you're going to hear this several times today. Industrial hemp is THC of 0.3% or less. If it's marijuana, oftentimes in the 1960s, there's probably 3, 4, 5% THC. Now, what you see in states like Colorado that are actually breeding for it, it can be 25 or 30%. Okay? Anything with a THC concentration of over 0.3% is considered to have only a small growth potential, but it's not legally hemp. Once it's over that 1%, depends on who you talk to again, it becomes having some limited intoxication potential. However, any of the material that's above 0.3% is marijuana. Next slide. So the other thing I want to clarify today a little bit is the waiver myth that's out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding that what the department can do if you go over 0.3% is to give you the ability to do something with material that's under 1%. The waiver was really created by the legislature, knowing that the program was getting started, there'd have to be some room to move with material that was over 0.3%. There was really never an intent to try to harm the farmer, but there was also no intent to be able to justify material that's over 0.3%. So, the department, in working with Stan Garnett, who was on the committee at the time of the Boulder
DA.
District Attorney's Office, and David Blake, who is with the Attorney General's Office, who are both on our advisory committee, kind of came up with a compromise that said, okay, where can we kind of settle that we feel comfortable? It's not going to waste a bunch of court time to prosecute somebody you really can't get high on material, and the 1% was kind of set for that waiver. So 0.3 to 0.1 was waiver. That material couldn't enter the stream of commerce, couldn't be used for human consumption, and had to be utilized on site. The on-site part is important because we can't give you the authority to transport an illegal marijuana grow. Once it's over 0.3%, it is not our jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction is 0.3% below. So the waiver is for any civil penalties that we would impose out of the program. So the best way to look at it is, if you've got material that's gone over 0.3%, and you come to us and say, boy, there's some material that's at 0.5%. I'd like to stay in the program. We'll work with you as long as you, like I said, destroy it on site, isn't used for human consumption, and it doesn't enter the stream of commerce, because we can't allow the transportation of what effectively by the Constitution is an illegal marijuana grow. And yet we want to give you an opportunity basically to turn the clock back and say, okay, no foul, didn't enter the stream of commerce, no penalty. Can't get high from it, so therefore we don't want to tie up the courts with things that just aren't going to, aren't really going to benefit society when it's in that range. So, so the CDA has the authority to grant waivers from prosecution for the cultivation of plant material that exceed 0.3% on a civil basis. It has nothing to do with criminal penalties. The waiver authority is limited to those penalties under the program, and we have no, again, legal authority for the cultivation, transport, or processing of anything over 0.3%. CDA can waive those civil penalties. We can choose not to revoke or suspend a license, but what we can't do is protect you from criminal penalties. That remains with local, state, and federal law enforcement officials should they decide to intercede. So this is something that has been floated out there, one of a number of things. And I'm just going to, I'll point on this in the next slide, but just be careful what you're sharing out there for information. Make sure it's constructive and not hurting yourself. So as I said, there's a lot of misinformation out there and it hurts you most. That information being circulated on the web sometimes is because somebody has a personal agenda. And what that does is inaccurate sometimes, misrepresents the program, and sometimes feeds into those people that want to see it fail, one. And the one that's maybe the one that caught my attention was how much it hurts investment. June, July, August, early September, I probably got a call a week from venture capitalist investors looking for people to work with. When this sort of stuff that you saw just before started to show up on the internet in high volume, the campaigns like Condemned for Public Safety by the Department of Ag and Free the Farmer, those phone calls quit. I followed up with a few, and they were, the comments I got back were really, boy, the industry looks a little out of control. We just decided to pull back investment. So make sure that what the message you're putting out there doesn't hurt yourself, because it doesn't matter to me. The less people register makes my job easier. What it's really important, though, is if you want this industry to grow, like we want to support the industry, you got to make sure you're not hurting yourself as well. Those campaigns I mentioned aren't factually correct. They're not accurate. They don't really reflect reality. Our compliance rates have risen, so there isn't a lot of material that's being condemned. There aren't a number of fields that are being condemned. And there actually is no condemnation because the CDA has no authority to condemn your field, not for public safety or any other reason. So that last photo you saw is about as inaccurate and damaging to the industry as anything I've seen. So if there's one takeaway message, it is that a few people who misrepresent a problem to push their personal agendas can hurt the entire industry by painting a problem as something it simply isn't. So, new faces in the industry. We'll have a new program manager coming in around the first of the year. That person will take over a lot of my role. No clapping in the back. We have a new seed certification specialist that Mitch introduced, Terry Moran. And then the advisory committee, as Mitch said, was expanded from 9 members to 11. They represent 2 new positions, the cannabinoid and the certified seed industry. 4 positions expired on January 15th. 5 more will expire on July 31st of 2016. So there's the advisory committee that is currently on. Those in bold were the ones that were just either new members or are reappointed members for 2015. Get to know them. They are vital to how we move this industry forward. I saw another one of our advisory committee enter. Bob, do you want to stand up? Introduce the rest. All right. So, and the department does want to thank, these committee members are like I said, not only an integral part of it, many of them are very active in helping us move things along and to gain a better understanding. So what changes have we seen? We'll go back to 2014 and compare that to 2015. 2014 was the first year hemp could legally be grown under state registration. And what we saw mostly were some small farms, not large areas, not many large areas, mostly outdoor, very few indoor. There was limited agronomic expertise in a lot of the places. Many of them were very underfunded. It was small scale. The other thing we also saw was that we had a lot of people that just wanted a registration because it was the first year you could. They really didn't have any interest, maybe limited interest, but they really weren't prepared to plant. They were looking for a certificate to hang on their wall that said the state was going to allow them to say, the heck with the federal government, we're going to plant. So it's a historic document. 2015 has already shown a shift in the industry. Outdoor production has increased significantly. Indoor space has exploded. The size of the grow sites has increased. The agronomic practices that you see in the rest of the farming and ranching industry have come into play. Businesses in general seem better funded. Production plans are in place. As I mentioned, venture capitalists and investors and processors are now starting to appear. So I think the industry is rapidly moving from its infancy, at least, to crawling. So this is where we were last year. I mentioned indoor grow sites. That's what we saw a lot of. These were pretty typical fields. This was one of our larger fields, and that was our largest field. That was 17 acres last year that we saw. So not all that big. So where have we come? And I'm going to thank one person for providing these slides, Michael Sullivan. This is just one of his fields and some of the products out of it. So while everybody complained last year and was yelling and screaming, there's no seed out there, look at the photo of the pallet loads of seed off those fields. Seed is not going to be the issue in this industry. Seed, quality seed, good quality seed, seed that is going to always meet the standard is where we need to go, but it's not the volume of seed. If all that seed were planted, or if all that seed would have been planted a year ago, farmers would already be backing away from production because they had no processors. So this industry has to grow hand in hand with processing. So you can see volume of seed is going to be there. It isn't going to take us long to have that same sort of volume in certified seed. The real question is getting the processors in there for a place to go. So 2014, 252 registrants, 119 commercial, 133 R&D, covering 1,811 acres, of which, as I mentioned, many of them, probably the majority, were looking for that first year of legalized hemp production in Colorado, the historic certificate to go with it. As of November 18th, we had 166 registrants who held 301 registrations. Difference is the number's slightly up, but the reality is these were people that were looking to plant now. Those registrations covered 3,657 acres of outside production and an additional 570,000 plus square feet of indoor production. The last time I looked, just to, not to go through all the figures again, that number has already climbed to 675,000 square feet in less than a month. So, as I mentioned, the indoor production has truly exploded. Of those, only 18 are R&D, and that shift is primarily when we talk about R&D, and I talked about this last year a lot. If you look at how other industries look at R&D, I'll use Ford Motor Company, the analogy I often use. 1960, they had a bunch of drawings in the back room. 62, they had a couple of concept cars on the Detroit Motor Car Show. And in 64, they launched the Ford Mustang, and every year since, there's been R&D in that. So we're not trying to limit R&D, we're just saying if you're doing it for commercial purposes, it's just under commercial registration, the same way every other industry is done. Okay? Maybe the biggest development we have seen, the most exciting one, is that we've got now 3 universities that have registered and are working industrial hemp, and I can honestly tell you that that number changed yesterday, or will change in the next couple of days, because I just signed another registration for CSU Pueblo. So we have 4 universities now in the state looking at it. So much different than we were a year ago. CDA imported 17 varieties of seed for agronomic research up at CSU. University of Colorado is working on some genome mapping and some potential applied sciences of the product. And Adams State started a multifaceted economic study on the crop and soil sciences. When I say multifaceted, it includes private individual, a nonprofit, a county, as well as a university outside of the state, who, as a university of an institution of higher education, but not in Colorado, they can't be the registrant, they can't transport material across the borders, but they can do soil research and a number of other things. So there's interest here in Colorado even beyond our borders and how to research some of the crop, to lay the groundwork for the industry. So, how's sampling and inspection gone? Well, first of all, sampling, inspection process is really it's a risk and random based. And when I say risk and random basis, we look to make a selection of who is selected for inspection and sampling. We look at the risk part first, and that's, boy, the last thing that any of us want is somebody to abuse the system and have a circle pivot of marijuana growing out there under a hemp registration. So if you're large, we're probably going to come and visit you. Then, if you're not turning in your forms, your planning records, your planning reports, we're probably going to visit you. If you're confrontational every time we either reach out to you or you reach out to us, well, we're probably going to visit you. But then, to make sure that those people that say, geez, they're not going to test anybody over 20 acres, I'm going to plant 19 and a half. I'm going to send everything in on time, and I'm going to smile big every time I talk to them. Make sure that somebody doesn't slide underneath the radar magically just because the rules allow them to find those little loopholes. We take the rest of the registrants and we enter them into a random drawing. We say, I'm going to do another, I'll pull a number out of the hat. We're going to do another 30 registrants for random part of the sampling. We take those names, we insert them into a great database source. It's called random.org. Go to the internet, dump them in. It kicks out the names in purely random order, lines drawn at 30, and that's who we visit. So, risk and random based sampling. Of the 3,657 acres that the department had registered, we inspected 2,012 of those acres this last year, which is about 55%. Taking samples on 1,398 acres and verifying did not plant on another 614. It's important to note that when somebody says they didn't plant, that doesn't mean we don't check. It's important to know that, if we created a loophole where somebody said I didn't plant, and we just went on to the next guy that did, eventually somebody would catch on and say, well, geez, all I have to do is turn in a planning record, and I'll just tell them every year I didn't plant. They're never gonna charge me for any inspection, because that gets me underneath the radar for that cost that may be associated. But it also means that somebody could plant industrial hemp or not industrial hemp. Use that for when law enforcement came to visit, and if law enforcement called and said, does this person have a registration? We would confirm it with them. But we're going to go out and confirm that if you said you didn't plant, there better not be plants there. It's a two-way street. Of those 1,398 acres, 1,290 of those acres, or 92%, were under the 0.3%. Last year, that number was 31%. Now, coming from a breeding perspective, I thought the first year out of the gate at 31% was rather remarkable. I have to tell you, at 8%, That's almost unbelievable. So, of those 109 acres, to put it in even a little more perspective, of those 108 acres that exceeded, 83 acres or 77% of that failed crop were in just 2 fields. So again, if you take those fields out, you don't have a lot of material that really was out there that failed. The department also sampled 90,401 square feet of indoor space, of which 96% were below the limit. And in 2 years, only 2 tests have come back that exceeded 1% THC outside of that waiver provision limits. So does that mean compliance has gone smoothly? Well, I can tell you, 2015 has brought some real challenges for the department. We've faced registrants who have threatened us this year. We've faced registrants who have failed to communicate with us, more than just the planting report and the harvest report. But when they found out they were out of compliance, they just tended to disappear in a couple cases. And we've seen an increased visibility in seed smuggling, activity that you find on the net. I would tell you, if you are farming and you don't know where that seed came from, if it's not from here in the state, and you want to plant seed that you believe or know is smuggled, you are jeopardizing your property. Ownership of your property is not because you're growing industrial hemp, it's because you're involved in a smuggling activity. And property seizure laws can take your property for smuggling, okay? What's happened is that's forced the department to summary suspend a registrant, look at revocation of others, and in some cases contact law enforcement for assistance and potential criminal enforcement. 2015 has also brought visits from the DEA to the CDA. And I can tell you that I'm sure if any of you were those visited by the DEA, Mitch and I can speak that it's not a comfortable feeling. We stepped out of another meeting, and Sam at the front desk that you all saw said we had 2 guests here to visit with us. Our 2 guests were here. I looked at Mitch and thought, why didn't you tell me we had somebody? And Mitch had the same look on his face, like I'd forgotten to tell him something. And so we walked over to reach out, and instead of a handshake, we got a badge, and said that we'd be spending the rest of the day with them. So, from being a state agent, you can say there's not always the, that cooperation level. We didn't get any more forewarning than what you do as a registrant. So we feel your pain when it comes to, well, I'm trying to work within the laws and what I call the intimidation factor. But they have a job to do. And, quite honestly, part of that has been done through intimidation, but also they're in a difficult position. They know that to them, everything cannabis related is illegal, and they don't get a lot of, any more guidance from other federal agencies than we get from any federal agency. So they're in a difficult position. I don't want to, sugarcoat it that they're easy to work with, though, and I can only imagine when you don't have immunity from the state how much harder that is. So, as a result, the department will be implementing some additional rules to protect the registrants who do comply with the program, and to make sure that those that are operating outside the system don't jeopardize it for everybody else. With that, I'm going to take just a moment to say, one of the issues the program still continues to face is making sure that we have all the forms, we have everything turned in the way it should be, so that should law enforcement, DEA come in and want to know what's going on with the registrant, we can't make something up. All we can do is open that file and say, yes, they're 100% compliant, or no, they're not, we don't have this. So the one message I have is communicate, and over-communicate with us. If you're not sure how to handle something, if you're not sure, boy, do I want to tell the CDA, or should I make sure this is in my file or not? I would tell you, call, ask, over-communicate. Don't miss the opportunity to get something in there that helps you protect yourself. So was it a bad year? The answer is absolutely not. The vast majority of our registrants have worked hard to comply with the rules. In some cases, the omissions from things in the file are simply because the farmer's used to planting corn and he doesn't have to turn in a planting report or a harvest report. We got to get past that. We got to understand that this isn't corn as much as we'd like it to be. There are some rules that help us all make sure that the program can operate. Like any industry, few individuals, bad actors hurt the perception of the industry for everyone. The department remains committed to implementing enough rules that those that participate in the program, as the commissioner said, have a level playing field and have the ability to operate without intervention. So, now we're going to move into the rules part. But I want to start with by saying that the department continues to look for ways to effectively manage the program without putting in place any unnecessary rules to do so. We'd like to use tools whenever possible and rules only whenever necessary. This is not to pick on my colleagues at DOR and MAD, but if you look at their book, it's about 400 pages long, and it's a lot of rules to tell an industry how to fit inside of a box. It works for them, and because it's marijuana and the issues they face with, especially with CDA, are at a much different scale than we face. But we take a different approach, and that's that, boy, we don't want to have any more rules than necessary, so the rules we'll implement will be because we've had people demonstrate bad behavior and we've got to find a way to take care of it. Or tools, if we can find a way to assist the industry without having to implement a rule. So the first one, testing tool. We've been working with DOR, MAD, CDPHE, and the Office of Information Technology, and I might add the governor's office, who, Andrew, raise your hand. So Andrew is the state marijuana coordinator who has joined us. To provide access to state certified labs for volunteer testing. Volunteer testing, did you hear that? Volunteer testing. Final development is where we're at now on the program, and security testing to make sure that information that you have in the databases is secure, can't be jeopardized. So we are almost there. Looks like January 1st it will still roll out. Confirm that as of this morning. Still, that seems to be the case. So the tool will allow the industrial hemp registrants to take sample to those private labs that MAD uses, the state certified labs. You'll do so by through an RFID system, much like MAD has. But unlike MAD, where every plant is tagged, you will get into the system, you'll log on into that system, you'll register with that system, you'll learn how to use that system, and then you will be able to get RFID tags for a batch. So if you've got 10 varieties out there and you want to test them twice, you get 20 RFID tags. It's not one for every plant, it's one for every batch that you want to take in. These, I'm going to remind everybody, are non-compliant samples. They do not take the place of compliance samples. Part of the reason is we don't know what part of the plant you're sampling. We don't know, it's not so much the lab, but every sample is taken different, how it's processed can be different, how long you leave it in the car before you transfer. All those things can affect the results. So they don't replace compliance testing, it will do, but they do give you a tool to monitor your crop. And I think that's important for everybody. I was liking this too. If you were growing corn, if you were a farmer growing corn for an ethanol plant, you'd be monitoring for starches and sugars. You ought to be doing the same thing in this crop because you're just monitoring for THC instead. Okay? Again, I'm going to mention voluntary. You don't have to participate. You don't have to use those labs. And the other thing is the information isn't shared with DOR, MAD, or anyone else. We'll have access to it, but we don't use it for compliance testing to make sure that you are above or below It just means we have access to it, and that's part of, they've gotta be able to get into our database. And I will say, it's not just, we didn't wanna share with DOR MED, they have no interest in it. So this is really a very good handshake for this industry with the other side of the cannabis industry. Okay, young plant production and harvest. Excellent. So one of the issues the industry has faced is the movement of young plant material. Many times people think of harvest as, gee, it's not in bud, I'm not harvesting bud, or I'm not harvesting seed. And what we're really looking at in this case is, so for those that don't know, I came from the ornamental plant industry. And a lot of times a plant there is started as a young plant. It's moved to maybe a pre-finished plant stage. It's maybe sold even to a different pre-finisher. And it's moved to a finisher, and then it's at the retail store you're at. So it's changed hands several times. A lot of those places that are touching along the way, their process may be 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks long. And when they're done with it, they're harvesting it. They're sending it to somebody else. So the same concept applies here. So Rule 1 helps us define what harvest means. It means the movement of industrial hemp from a registered land area to another location, or movement within a registered land area between indoor and outdoor planting areas. Another issue that we faced a lot the last 2 years have been disputes between property owners, registrants that are working together with one another when they signed up, but they aren't working so well together now, or landowners. Most of those times, those are literally contract disputes. They're not something that involves the CDA. We'll try to talk to both registrants, talk to both parties, and explain the importance of making sure we're in there to comply. Literally, if for nothing else than if the farmer says, well, I don't want him on my property anymore, so he hasn't paid his bills, or boy, I just don't like him anymore. Well, that's fine. But the property owner needs to understand that it's still growing on his property. And so we try to communicate to, if it goes over that 0.3%, because it's on your property, you still have some liability. Same with two partners that are involved. If you are both signed into the program, I won't take, one calls me and says, I don't like Grant anymore, so I'm gonna take him off my registration. I can't do that, because how do I know Grant doesn't want to call and kick me off the program? So everybody that's signed into as a registrant is equally liable until they can come to some agreement. What this is for, is to ensure that when there's those disagreements arise, that we still have access to that plant material. That it is, we can try to negotiate as best we can with all those parties, but we want to make sure that everybody understands we have to have access. So, Rule 2.18, a registrant must have the legal right to cultivate industrial hemp on the registered land area and the legal authority to grant the department access for inspection and sampling. It just means part of the burden is on the person that signed up with the program. Again, if a farmer didn't even know his property was used, he may not want us to be there. Still a contract situation. The registrant may have gotten a registration to grow something and the farmer didn't know what it was. So we want to make sure that the registrant knows he's got to have the legal right to grow hemp there. So perpetuation of genetics and volunteer plants. One of the problems, excuse me. One of the problems, again, that we have faced has been the original rules were written that said all plant material had to be planted and harvested under one registration. Well, that worked well when we thought 99 or more % was going to be outdoor production. You have somebody come in with a registration, and initially the registrations all had to be done early in the spring. So you planted in the spring, you'd harvest in the fall, and there was no conflict. Well, what we've seen now with indoor production, that's on a year-round basis. Many registrants came in the middle of the summer. They didn't plant that summer, but they planted the next spring. The registration would expire in the middle of the summer. How do we handle plant materials like that? Well, again, we went back and we kind of drew some of this from the ornamental industry, where sometimes genetics, if you go to the grocery store, Home Depot, or your nursery, and you find there's a geranium there, that geranium is stock material that's been held over. Well, we had to find a way to perpetuate genetics, because if we didn't, as soon as we got good genetics, stuff that stayed under that 0.3, so that was one of the issues we wanted to address. And the other issues come up from a number of registrants have said, boy, this stuff, it went to seed last year, and now it's coming up everywhere. And we said, geez, we have a planting report, didn't really plant it, so how do we address it before this becomes a real major issue? So, with that, Rule 2.11, all industrial hemp plant material must be planted, grown, and harvested under a valid registration. Any plant material that is not harvested in the registered period in which it was planted, or volunteer plants that are not destroyed, must be declared for an inclusion in a subsequent registration. So literally there's a means now to carry material forward with the inclusion that we've been using to help facilitate this, but the volunteer plants really made this really important to address right here in rule. Funny, because no plant can be covered by more than one registration.